All right. Good afternoon, Jamf Nation. How's everybody doing? Yeah? Everybody excited for the party tonight? Awesome. Who was in the return to service session this morning? Anybody? Any hands? Awesome. Well, hey, we're going to dive deeper into what Matt was talking about this morning in my session. So come to the stage, guys. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so we got Matt and Chris here.
I've got over. Cool. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to our session. As Adam was saying, this is the student loaner devices session. We are going to talk about how we at District 65 leverage return to service for consistent loaner iPad experiences. It would help if I grabbed the clicker. So who are we? My name is Matt Skripczynski. I am the iOS and tvOS admin at District 65. I've been there for about 3 years. Prior to that, I worked at a church in the Chicagoland area managing all of their audio-video lighting equipment. And prior to that, I worked for Apple for 6 years as Apple genius. Chris?
My name is Chris Lange, and I currently work as our school district's student information systems manager. And I also do I wear a lot of hats like a lot of us do in education. So I do a lot of programming, connecting platforms to other platforms and stuff like that. So yeah, I've been in education since 2015, and yeah, that's about it.
Both of our handles on the Mac Admin Slack are up on screen, so if you want to get in touch with any of us, ask us any follow-up questions, please do. We're both pretty active on there and are pretty responsive. But before we really dive in, I want to give you guys a little bit of information on who we are at District 65. We are a consolidated school district, so what that means is all of the public K-8 schools in the city of Evanston are part of our district. We have 18 sites. We have 3 6-8 middle schools, 10 5-8 elementary schools, 2 education centers, and then our district office that also has our preschool. We've got about 6,500 students, roughly 2,000 staff, and as of today, when I checked earlier, we actually have closer to 10,000 devices in our MDM instance. So I wanted to give you guys a little brief excerpt of our technology mission statement that drives a lot of the decisions that we make. Because even though we all work in technology and have a very technical job, I personally believe that all of our decisions should be made through the lens of why our organization exists. That really helps unify our approach to a consistent goal. So what I wanted to share with you guys was we strive to eliminate barriers to digital access, providing students and staff with the tools, support, and opportunities they need to succeed. Ultimately, I don't want technology to be a barrier if something is going wrong. I want it to really effectively just disappear and just be something that works. If technology not working is being a barrier to a student succeeding, I'm not doing my job correctly. So this is why we really wanted to refine our student loaner workflow so that if a kid comes in and their device isn't functional, we can minimize downtime, get them right back to learning. Sample scenario, I want to know if this sounds familiar to any of you guys. Kids are coming in for the day, teacher says, hey, take out your iPads. Little Johnny opens up his bag, pulls out his iPad, and it looks like that. Familiar to anyone? So in the past, we would have loaners in our front offices, we would have them in our library, kids would wander around the school to try to find a loaner. So this year, or actually last year, we settled on a single loaner for every classroom. So that way the teacher can just reach into their desk, grab the loaner, hand it off to the kid, minimize downtime, keep kids in classrooms, and we're off to the races. That said, a lot of times those loaners had issues. There's a couple of different options that Apple gives us when it comes to loaner devices or shared devices. Apple's shared iPad configuration is really easy to implement. It's just a checkbox on your pre-stage enrollment. It allows the user to just sign in with their Apple ID. All of their stuff is there. It's ready to rock. It's super easy for you as an admin to implement, but there's a few trade-offs. If you allow space for multiple users, then that space gets cut in half or thirds or more, and you might have a student pulling out a loaner, signing in, they're doing an iMovie project for a media class. The device doesn't have enough space. The other trade-off there is there's also the shared iPad passcode, which is different than your Apple ID passcode. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like first graders have a hard enough time remembering their password, let alone an additional shared iPad passcode that's different. We had a whole bunch of tickets for students forgetting those passcodes. So that wasn't really a viable option for us. Similarly, a generic loaner profile of just this is an iPad that's set up with our MDM and sitting in your classroom that's a shared device. It's great because it has access to all the storage on the device, but what happens when a student forgets to sign out of their Apple ID, forgets to sign out of Google Classroom, takes a 3-hour video of their feet and then turns it back into the teacher, and again, it's out of space. It doesn't work. What can we do to solve that? Enter return to service. Shout out to the folks at Jamf for their hands-on demo last year, because this is what really kind of kicked us into gear with utilizing this. If you guys haven't gotten any hands-on experience with the return to service app, I believe Adam still has another session that's going to talk about that. Great, there's 2 brain dates tomorrow about that, where you can play around with the app. But introduced with iOS 17, return to service, MDM can send an erase command including Wi-Fi details and an optional enrollment profile so the device can erase all data and automatically proceed to the home screen ready to be used. If you want some more information about that, there's a link to Apple's support article that has some great info about return to service. But essentially, it lets the device wipe itself, and without touching glass, it connects to Wi-Fi, selects the region, auto-enrolls, gets back to your home screen. A couple of notes about return to service. It doesn't support any enrollment customizations. So if you are an org that has your users sign in with any sort of credentials during Setup Assistant, it's not going to work. That return to service command is going to fail, and it won't go through. This is an app that is now available in both Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. Previously, you had to reach out to your Jamf account rep, and it would show up as a custom app, but it's now available for everybody. And then the other thing is the app is not required if you want to use API commands. So later on, Chris is going to talk about how we use a Python script running on a Mac Mini to automate this process every night. So all 300 of our loaners every night at, I think, 2 a.m. wipe themselves, re-enroll every morning. It's like a fresh iPad out of the box. So that was a lot talking about just an overview of what we're doing here. Our actual setup, we're going to talk about inventory preload, configuration profiles, smart groups, app scopes, the managed app config, and then I'll kick it over to Chris to talk about the scripting and automating. A lot of this stuff is going to be very unique to our instance and our deployment, so take what we say with a grain of salt. Some things that we do may not make sense for you. This is just showing how it can be used in one scenario. So inventory preload, serial number and device type, username, building, and asset tag. For us, the easiest way if a teacher is having an issue with a device to look that up is by the asset tag. So I always want to make sure that a serial number and asset tag are tied together with inventory preload before we do anything. And that's one of the things that we set up with all of our devices when we first unboxed them from Apple. Device type is required whenever you're using inventory preload, so I felt compelled to put that up there. And then the username, for our loaner devices, in our instance, we use cert-based authentication for our Wi-Fi profiles. So in order for these devices to show up on our student Wi-Fi network, we needed to assign a shared user to that. That's not really relevant for enrolling it with return to service, but I included that because that's part of our workflow. So these devices get a generic enrollment network when they're erasing themselves, and then once they're pulling down everything from Jamf, they get the correct user-based cert. And then we use the building moniker so that if we're piloting a specific app in one school and not the other, we're using smart groups with these loaner iPads so that those loaners will get that piloted app, but not other schools. Configuration profiles, this is where we're pushing out things like web clips. So if a school library has a homepage that they want on their loaner iPads and all their student iPads, those are included there. Any restrictions that are on our student devices are part of these configuration profiles. And for this instance here, we're using a home screen layout configuration profile. This ensures that if a student deletes any apps, adds any apps, puts things in folders, whatever they do, the next morning, everything's going to go right back to the way that it's supposed to be. So for our smart groups, we use 2 smart groups for our loaner devices. We have what I'll call our root smart group. So in this example, it is the Lincoln K5 loaner iPads. That's going to be all of the iPads that are the loaners for that particular school. The way that they get into that smart group is, are they part of our loaner pre-stage, and do they have Lincoln as this building in the inventory preload? So no matter what iPads are getting enrolled or getting set up as loaners, as long as they are added to inventory preload and in that proper pre-stage, they're going to show up in that smart group. That's where all of our apps are scoped to, so that the very first thing that's going to happen is this device enrolls, it gets all of its apps, and then it goes into this enrollment finish smart group. The reason why we have an enrollment finish smart group is because that is actually what the home screen layout is scoped to. In our testing, we found that if you just scope your home screen layout config profile to the same smart group as your apps, things are going to go out of order, random order. If that profile is added before all of the apps are installed, then you may get duplicate folders, you may get apps that don't show up in a folder at all, apps might get hidden. It just gets really wonky really fast. So that's the only thing that's scoped to that enrollment finish smart group, and that's how we ensure that the config profile for our home screen layout goes after the apps. So the criteria for that is, are the devices a member of that first smart group, and does it have A, B, C, D, E app? That makes sure that that all happens. For the return to service app, if you choose to use the app instead of the API, we scope that to our loaner iPad smart group for our elementary schools, but not for our middle schools. We found in our early testing, middle school students would find that app and actually use it to get out of like taking a test or something like that. So we just chose to hide that and rely on the automation for those folks. But for our elementary students, if a teacher wants to give the iPad from one student to another, they can hit return to service, and within about 5 or 7 minutes, it's ready to go, it's wiped, it's like a brand new iPad. Jamf has recently come out with a great app guide for return to service that goes through all of the documentation. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes, and you are ready to rock and roll, and it's all set up. The biggest thing that I wanted to point out is you need to tell the return to service app what Wi-Fi profile it wants to cache on the device before it erases the device. So in this instance, you'll find your Wi-Fi profile ID at the end of your Jamf URL when you are looking at that profile in the Jamf UI. I highlighted, it's kind of hard to see here, but in this example, it's profile number 153. That's what we would put into the app record under app configuration per the app guide, so that return to service knows to look at that profile. For apps, we have a lot of apps that are auto-installed on our student iPads that would take an exorbitant amount of time and network utilization if we're going to be installing on 300 iPads all at once when these are all wiping themselves. And it would also delay when one of these iPads is getting turned around to a new student. So the way that I got around that was I duplicated some apps in our Jamf app library. So I've got one set to auto-install, and that goes to all of our students, and that's going to install on all of their one-to-one iPads. And for our loaner iPads, I have the self-service one. So in this example of Google Docs, if a kid needs Google Docs for whatever they're doing that given day, they can go to self-service, install it, it pops up on the loaner. When it wipes itself, it's not going to take time installing that. When we first set this up and I just had all of the student apps installing automatically on the student loaners, it took somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes for an iPad to reset itself, and now we've gotten it down to 5 to 7 by being really strategic about what apps are included in that initial loadout for these loaners. And then I think I'm going to kick it over to you.
Cool.
Great.
So Matt sent me a Slack message one day, and he's included all sorts of information about return to service, and I had never heard of it before. And as someone who previously was doing the job he's doing now for a few months, we had some staffing issues kind of thing, I was really excited about it, because it sounds like what I was trying to do with loaners was now like an actual supported process that we could actually use. So really what Matt wanted to do was like, hey, I got this cool idea, but there's one thing missing. I want it to happen automatically. I don't want the people in the front office to have to do it. I don't want our technicians to have to go out and do it. So how do we automate this? And for me, when I'm trying to just come up with a quick workflow, Python's my go-to language. You can do it with any language you really want to do. But for me, Python's just a quick way to get it going. So, oh, thanks. So what I did was, first off, these are the list of the API methods that are actually used in the script. So what it's going to do is it's going to actually pull a mobile device group, all the devices in it, and it does that so that it can get the ID of those devices. Once it has that, it then does a get mobile device command so that it can get the management ID. And after that, it actually creates the MDM command with the embedded erase device command within it. Part of that involves using the configuration profile needs to be converted into base 64. So my script, I wanted to make it as easy as possible because sometimes that's not as easy to figure out some of those steps. So here's a little example of how the script actually works. What it's going to do is it's going to prompt you for several different things when you run it. I wouldn't say it's supported on every operating system because it uses the keyring library by Python. Keyring actually stores it on your system keychain if you're on Mac as an example. I forget what the Windows equivalent of that is, but it also uses the Windows equivalent of a credentials manager. And so the idea is you don't need to have your password or your username on the actual script itself, which we all don't want to be doing. Sorry, I just got to make sure I didn't miss anything here. All right, yeah. It's also going to ask for you for a list of mobile device groups. You can provide multiple if necessary. I think do we do multiple for that?
Right now, it's just scoping to, or it's just running on the all device.
All devices.
Yep.
So
you could do multiple.
ultimately, if you have different workflows that you're trying to work with, you could provide multiple groups for that. And then it also needs your Jamf endpoint, of course. It needs to know where to actually communicate to. So once you run the script the first time, it doesn't actually do anything. It's going to prompt you for that information, but I decided that for this example, I didn't want it to all of a sudden erase all the iPads right in front of you, because that could have unexpected results. You might not want to erase every iPad that is in that group right now. What it actually does is it sets up a configuration file, and that configuration file then stores your Wi-Fi profile. I forgot to include in the previous slide that you also need to include a path to the Wi-Fi profile because it has to convert that to base 64 and include it in the command. So it's going to create this configuration profile. You can open it up. It's just a text file, basically. And if you need to change anything in it, that would be the place to look. The GitHub, which was in a previous slide, has a lot more information about that, including the way I set it up, which was via launch agent. You can do it with cron. You can do it with launch daemons. I just set it up with launch agents because I've never created a launch agent before, and I wanted to try it. So that was my reasoning behind that.
Do you want to go back to the slide with the GitHub link on it? If people want to, here, I got it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to take a picture of that link, Chris has that posted on GitHub along with some documentation?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of figure it out on your own?
No, there's some documentation.
Okay,
but feel free to message me on Mac admins or to create issues on the repository. I'm absolutely happy to help troubleshoot for you. I like writing in Python. It would be a good distraction from what I'm doing regularly in my job, which is managing a student info system, and I don't like that very much.
All right.
So that's pretty much it for the workflow. Oops.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So we wanted to also show a brief demo of how this works. So this is just going to show what this looks like from the perspective of a teacher using the Return to Service app. And through the magic of video editing, well, it didn't play the video. Let's see. Through the magic of video editing, we can speed up time. So we don't have to sit and watch a 7-minute video. So teacher opens up Return to Service. They tap on the big red button. In the latest version of Return to Service, which I forgot to mention earlier, you can add a passcode to that. So that would have solved my problem with my middle schoolers using Return to Service to get out of testing. But then the problem is you need to share that passcode with staff, and they need to remember it. But as you can see, it's already skipped through selecting your region, selecting your language, getting on your Wi-Fi network, because that Wi-Fi profile is stored in a secure area of the device separate from the user data partition. And then it erases all the user data and then just starts auto-advancing, similar to an Apple TV auto-advancing through Setup Assistant, if you guys are familiar with that, of plug it into Ethernet, plug it into power, and it'll just set itself up. So at this point, you can see that it's already started to get things like our wallpaper for our loaners. And in a moment here, we'll get to the home screen, and we see apps, but they're not in folders yet. Again, the apps are going to drop into folders at the very end. So what I've told all of our teachers, or told all of our techs that have communicated that to our teachers, is once you see all these apps disappear into folders and collapse down into a really nice, neat screen, like that, then you know it's done. But if it doesn't do that, something went wrong. It's a very easy visual notification that something didn't happen correctly in the process, and to reach out with support ticket. And with that, we've got some time for some questions. And yeah, just wanted to say thanks for coming to our session. But if anybody has questions, raise your hand. Adam was going to come around with a microphone so people on the stream can hear what the question is. Got one up here. He's coming down.
Yeah, do you guys do anything as far as keeping track of names for all of these devices?
So right now, we just have a short answer, no. We just have a list of these are the devices that are the loaners for this building, and they're distributed to the classrooms as they're needed. So at the beginning of the year, we've just said, hey, how many K through 5 classes are there, and how many things like music, library, coding are there in each one of those classrooms? Just get a device, and we took track of how many of those devices went into each school.
With adding that home screen layout after all the apps are installed,
Yeah.
do you have to have an inventory update scheduled to actually complete that and see all the apps installed? Or does it actually automatically recognize that once the apps are installed?
So once the device is enrolled and starting to download all of those apps, the last command that gets sent is installed app list, and that actually updates the device record to then drop it into that smart group. That way, we're not having to rely on a pre-scheduled thing, because if we pre-schedule that to run every 30 minutes, and a teacher at 3:03 runs return to service, we don't want them to have to wait for that to happen. But that's something that's already baked into the functionality of Jamf. We didn't even have to think about that, but that's a good question.
Secure or unsecured wireless?
So when the devices are getting set up and going through Setup Assistant, it's on a hidden enroll network that just has a normal pre-shared key. But then for our instance, because we're using cert-based authentication, we assign that shared student user via the inventory preload. So the user is assigned in Jamf, and then that is getting the correct cert for ClearPass is what we use. And then once it's enrolled, it moves over from that enroll network to our normal student network.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here. Return to service does not support 802.1x. It's meant to be a touchless workflow.
And this is how we got around that.
Yep.
Was, we use 802.1x in our district, and we really want to minimize the amount of devices that are not using that. So it's just a temporary. In the new Return to Service app, I think you guys were talking about how you can set a profile to self-destruct.
Yeah.
I built a profile and built an expiration time of 30 minutes into the profile itself, so that when the profile gets issued to the device, even if something happened and it didn't move over to our 802.1x network, that profile would just self-destruct and it would force it over to that anyways.
Yeah, that self-destruct key is available in the RTS app guide. So jamf.it/RTS app-guide has all that information in there. Even the passcode requirement
Yeah.
that we put on the app recently.
So there's been a lot of feature enhancements that have happened since we built this. We just kind of made this happen pretty quickly after JNUC last year, and then haven't really had time to update our workflow with some of these new enhancements, and I really wish that we have, because it would have made a lot of sense for us.
It works. It works. That's all that matters.
Yeah. So.
Any additional questions? Yep.
The passcode portion, is that defined in app config?
Adam?
Yeah, so it's a new key that's defined in the app config. You'll see it right in the app guide. So we added that a month ago.
Anybody else have any questions? Or want to poke holes in our process and help us make it better? Adam, we've got a hand back here. If you want to say the question, I can repeat it. Oh, it's over here.
Are you using are you using Jamf Pro or Jamf School?
Very good question. We are using Jamf Pro, but as far as I know, and Adam can correct me on this as well, return to service works with both Pro and School.
So, yes. So the return to service app.
At the bike.
So the return to service application only works in Jamf Pro. Jamf School has return to service built into it. So you could do mass action commands. There's actually even a button that could be selected to return to service a device, just like a wipe. So that capability has been requested in Pro. The app has been requested in School. We'll see where we go from there.
I think we've got a follow-up question over here. Thanks for all the questions, guys.
Have you thought about combining this with Jamf Class Assigner to allow the teachers to sit there and assign the usernames?
So Chris was actually mentioning that to me this week. I had no idea that Jamf Class Assigner was a thing before this week, so we are probably going to take a look at that, because that would really help make it better.
Yeah, those two combined would be just amazing.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to see Jamf Class Assigner, if you were not able to attend the session, just go to the expo hall, and you could go over to the education space, and you could see Jamf Class Assigner in action.
Cool. Any other questions?
We got one right back here.
Brilliant.
I saw some additional steps that the student has to take on your wallpaper. What
Yes.
were they?
Yeah, very good question. So we just have this wallpaper that tells a student to sign into their district Apple ID. So it says open settings, sign into your Apple ID. And then I think for that particular one, it said open Gmail or Google Drive and sign into your Google account. It's really just to make sure. So we're both an Apple and Google district. So we leverage Apple Classroom. We leverage our managed Apple IDs. So things like students' iMovie projects are stored in iCloud. So if something happens to their device, they sign into their Apple ID, it's available. But then our teachers really heavily utilize Google Classroom as well for lessons and assignments and things like that. So this is just kind of a, hey, remember, sign into those things so that you can actually get your work done.
I don't see any other hands. Any additional questions?
Cool.
Cool. Well, how about a big round of applause for these guys?
Thank you guys all so much for coming. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of JNUC, and hope to see you at the party.